In John 21, at the end of John's Gospel, we find a very moving conversation. Peter had told Jesus before his death, even if everyone denies you, I will never deny you. But when the time came and things got dangerous for the disciples, Peter denied that he knew Jesus 3 times and broke that promise. Well, now that Jesus has been resurrected at the end of John's Gospel, Jesus has 3 questions for Peter. In John 21, look in verses 15 to 17. Verse 15, so when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, tend my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, shepherd my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. Since Peter denied Jesus 3 times, Jesus gives Peter 3 opportunities to reaffirm his love for him. But that bothers Peter. You know, why does Jesus have to ask me this 3 times? I mean, you already know the answer. You know I love you. Couldn't you have just asked once? Well, I think Jesus is asking 3 times because he wanted Peter to be sure of his answer. It's one thing to say that you love Jesus. It's another thing to mean it. Just like it's one thing to say, Peter, that you'll never deny Jesus. It's another thing to actually mean that when the time comes. So as we prepare our hearts for the Lord's Supper this morning, I want us to imagine Jesus asking us the same question. Do you love me? I imagine we'd probably all say, yes, I love you, Jesus. But imagine him asking us 3 times to find out if we really mean it. And also imagine him asking, how much do you love me? Turn over now with me to Luke chapter 7. We're going to read about a different Simon here in Luke 7, and this is where we'll stay for the rest of our lesson this morning, because in Luke chapter 7, Jesus is going to show us how to answer that question, do you love me? And how much do you love me? He gives us a gauge for determining how deep our love really is. And let's read in verse 36 down to the end of the chapter. Verse 36, now one of the Pharisees was requesting him to dine with him. And he entered the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And there was a woman in the city who was a sinner. And when she learned that he was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster vial of perfume. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and kept wiping them with the hair of her head, and kissing his feet and anointing them with the perfume. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who and what sort of person this woman is who is touching him, that she is a sinner. And Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he replied, say it, teacher. A moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they were unable to repay, he graciously forgave them both. So which of them will love him more? And Simon answered and said, I suppose the one whom he forgave more. And he said to him, you have judged correctly. Turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but she, since the time I came in, has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she anointed my feet with perfume. For this reason I say to you, her sins, which are many, have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. And he said to her, your sins have been forgiven. And those who were reclining at the table with him began to say to themselves, who is this man who even forgives sins? And he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. I just want to make 3 observations from this text this morning. Number 1, it is possible to eat with Jesus and yet not love him. Simon had Jesus into his home for a meal, but he did not love Jesus. In fact, he did not even extend him the most common of courtesies that you would normally extend your guests, typically in that culture, because the streets were very, more like dusty trails. It was customary to wash your guests' feet when they came over, or at the very least to have a servant, if you had a servant, to do that for you. Simon didn't do that for Jesus. It was customary to greet them with a kiss on the cheek. Simon didn't do that. It was customary to anoint their heads with oil. He didn't do any of that for Jesus. Imagine how you'd feel if you came over to my house for dinner and you knocked on the door and I opened the door, and instead of greeting you or, shaking your hand or anything, I just said, yeah, come in. And then maybe it's the 3 weeks of winter that we have in Florida, and so you got your jacket on, you come in, and you sit on my couch, and you're just wearing your jacket on my couch, and I don't offer to take your coat for you, and I just expect you to figure out what to do with it. Or it's maybe an hour before we're going to eat dinner, and I offer you nothing to drink while you wait. Those are just common courtesies that we extend to show our guests that we value them, that we honor them, that we respect them. Simon didn't do any of those things for Jesus. I think because he was a Pharisee, he probably wasn't really inviting Jesus over for friendship and for fellowship. Probably he was just trying to trap Jesus in something he said, find some way to accuse him of something. But here's a man eating with Jesus, but he doesn't love him. And likewise, brethren, it is possible for us to eat with Jesus during the Lord's Supper and not really love him. We may be doing it merely as a weekly ritual or routine with not much thought or heart behind it. We may be doing it because we don't live for Jesus throughout the week at all, but we think, well, I need to take the Lord's Supper so I can kind of get forgiven for all this, things I did this week, so it kind of hits the reset button, so now I can go on living for myself again the following week. Or maybe we do it to make people around us think we're right with God when we're really not, or for a host of other wrong reasons. And Jesus' question this morning is, do you love me? Second thing we see from this text is that Jesus can read our hearts and our minds. When Simon, the Pharisee, said that thing about the woman, if you really understood how terrible this woman was, like he wouldn't even let her near him. Notice the text in verse 39 says he said that to himself. I don't think this was something verbal that he said publicly in front of Jesus. I think this is something he thought in his own mind and in his own heart. And Jesus could read his heart. Jesus could read his mind. He knew that Simon did not love him, and yet in his heart, Simon is condemning a woman who actually does love Jesus. And Jesus looks at Simon in wonder, because this woman is doing for him all the things that Simon should have done for him. He points out by way of comparison, this woman who doesn't even live here has treated me far better than you have. She didn't really use water to wash his feet, but she used her tears. She didn't use a towel to wipe his feet off. She used her hair. Can you just imagine the sand and the dirt and the dust in her hair? What a mess that would have made her. She didn't care. She loved Jesus so much. She kissed Jesus. Simon didn't. But she didn't kiss him in the normal way that you would kiss somebody on the cheek. She's kissing his feet, and she's doing it repeatedly. She anointed Jesus with precious perfume. Simon didn't do that, and that perfume was very costly. Yet, in an act of love and generosity, she She poured it upon Jesus. The parable that Jesus tells there about the man who forgave those debts is to rebuke Simon's heart because he knew what he was thinking. Jesus knows our hearts this morning. He knows whether we love him or not. And he knows how much we love him. And that leads to the last point. How much we love Jesus is based on how much we believe we've been forgiven. Why didn't Simon love Jesus? It's because he didn't think he needed Jesus' forgiveness. He thought he was righteous already on his own. Someone once said, "The greatest of sins is to be conscious of none." In contrast, why did this woman love Jesus so much and in such an over-the-top way? It's because she knew how sinful she was and how desperately she needed Jesus' forgiveness. The more we appreciate our own sinfulness, the more we'll appreciate our desperate need for forgiveness. And the more we appreciate our desperate need for forgiveness, the more grateful we'll be for Jesus providing that forgiveness for us on the cross. And the more grateful we are for Jesus providing that forgiveness on the cross, the more we will love him. And that's why in John 21, where we started, I believe at that point, Peter really did love Jesus very much. Because he knew the depth of his sin. He knew he had betrayed, he had denied the Son of God and allowed him to be turned over to crucifixion. And yet Jesus forgave him anyway. Because Jesus forgave much in Peter. Peter loved much. And so as we partake of the Lord's Supper this morning, and we try to answer the question Jesus is asking us, do you love me? And how much do you love me? A great way to find out the answer to that question is to ask, how much have I been forgiven?